Hello, my name is William Biersack from the Office of Digital Learning and Instructional Design Services at Mount St. Mary College, and I'm joined today by Bernadette O'Halloran and Anne-Marie Uebbing, both professors for the School of Nursing at the college. And today we will be discussing for you how to align your assessments in your course with eClass Gradebook, and also some best practices and tips and our experiences with grading, is particularly in web-enhanced hybrid online formats, because we've had a fair amount of experience in all the above between the three of us. Yeah, so to start off, I thought what we could do is discuss for those new faculty members how to get started with setting up your gradebook. So of course, whenever I'm meeting with a new faculty member, my very first bit of advice is to start with the syllabus. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and I'll share my fully online course and my syllabus. So of course, there's different flavors. Different people have different methods for setting up their course grading. For me, my MO was to go off of points. And this was kind of a bit of a trend that's been happening with faculty teaching fully online courses. They've wanted to structure their grading based on a number of points. And each individual assignment adds up to a certain point value. And with a simple addition on the student end, it's easier for the students to wrap their heads around how the points interplay with each other and do any course correction if they are not getting the points that they need to succeed in the course. So in this case, I had a bunch of different evaluation criteria. And actually, becomes a bit of a separate conversation about the different types of assessments, but I did want to have different types of assessments, different opportunities for my students to demonstrate their understanding. And for me, it was a bit of a conversation in my head about Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. So wanting a mix of collaborative and individual, some visual, some literary, some just targeting all the different intelligences so that students of all learning types would have fair amounts of experience. And also for those students attacking the same content from different angles, my hope was that it would set in the content a little bit more. But yeah, so I had all my categories structured in my syllabus, and I knew how all the points would come together in the end, in the final calculation of the student's grade. So then the question became how to structure it in eClass so that I could bring my vision to life. So in your eClass course, you would go to the administration block and click Gradebook Setup. So for me, in my course, to build the structure, I took each of the different evaluation criteria types in my syllabus, and I mapped it out in Gradebook categories. So for example, technology learning checks, this was my low stakes assessment option in each module of my course. So I just bound those up together into a category. And so for newcomers to Moodle/eClass, to add a category in your gradebook setup, you just go to the bottom of the page, click Add Category, give your category a name, and you would choose an aggregation method for that category. So if you just want things to add up together nice and neat, you will be choosing natural, which would add up the points together. So if it's 5 points, 5 points, 5 points, adding up to 15, this is what you would choose. Rather, if you just want a collection of assignments to do a simple average, what I would recommend is simple weighted mean of grades for these subcategories. If there's ever a case like for the bulk of the gradebook, if you ever want to choose what percentages would factor into the averaging, you would choose weighted mean of grades, and that would allow you to actually physically type in what percentage each individual item would be. So so what you would do is you would go by your syllabus and plug in each of those categories into your gradebook, as I have. In my case, because all the points are adding up, I chose natural aggregation as the main aggregation method in my gradebook. If I was using percentages instead, and each of my categories were a percentage of the total, I would have chosen weighted mean of grades instead for my gradebook. And of course, once your categories are set up and your structure is defined, then you can go forward and actually build some assessments in your gradebook. So you see already I have several quizzes, several assignments, and etc. And you'll notice they each have a different icon on here. The red checkmark icon is indicative of an E-class based quiz or test. The little hand with a file is indicative of an E-class assignment where students would physically hand in a document or a file privately to the instructor. You may also see some discussion forums, which would be indicated by a little chat bubble icon. But what I'll share with you now is if you ever needed to manually add in a grade item, something that would not necessarily have any online participation. So for example, say I'm a faculty member and I just want to put in a value for Zoom attendance, for example. So you would put in the item name, Zoom attendance, and participation in this case. The grade type will be a value, and I can set up what point value it would be in my gradebook. So for example, say it's 5 points out of the 100. You could then choose which grade category it would go into. So for example, say I was going to redefine the discussion forums to be an overall participation. So I would put it in that grade category. There we go, Zoom attendance and participation. And it's at 5 points, and it has this little gray paper on pencil icon to indicate that it's a manual item. All other item types, quizzes, assignments, you could just build those out as you go throughout the semester. When you build the quiz or assignment, and if you have any questions about building quizzes, assignments, or forums, you can definitely come to my office with questions. We also have resources available on our website and our YouTube channel. But when you go to add these assignments, you'll have an option to select a grade category when you create these. So what that will do is when you create the quiz, the assignment, or the forum, it will automatically create the slot for the grade in the gradebook setup. By selecting the grade category, when you first create the assignment, it will automatically file it away in the correct category. So what in the beginning of the semester, you just build your categories to create the structure that the students will see. And then later on, when you create those assignments, selecting the grade category setting will just allow you to file them away in the correct space to create some organization for your course assignments. And if you have any more questions, concerns, or inquiries about setting up the gradebook setup for your specific case, feel free to make an appointment with my office. But now I would like to move ahead and instead discuss a little bit more in terms of tips and best practices and experiences with grading, both in class, in the classroom, in the world, in many contexts, and that is why we have Anne-Marie and Bernadette joining us today. So I've already shared a little bit of how I grade my course, mix of low stakes and high stakes assessment, trying to target different assessment types and learning styles in my assessment strategies, giving multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate their proficiency with the content, both informative cases where they can reflect on their learning and check in with themselves, and also in more summative cases where they, demonstrate their final proficiency in the course content. But yeah, I would like to open the floor to you two. I mean, so whether you have any questions for me about, like, of course, like mine is, like, rife with a lot of content, and that's just by virtue of that was also a fully online course. So every single, all of the minutia of the learning content was happening on eClass. So if you have any questions about that, or if you wanted to discuss your own take on grading with your own classes, just wanted to open the floor to you guys.
I guess my course predominantly, with the exception of one, is very much based on a clinical portion of the course.
Right.
And those workshops, those attestations, attendance documentation, course evaluations are part of the gradebook as well.
Sure.
And this is always a point of contention, but a way to incentivize a student is to make it pass fail. They cannot get their final course grade without that documentation, post clinical evaluation. So there are other additional components you can add into the gradebook that are not necessarily part of the cumulative grade, but are required and can get flagged. So that's actually something I wanted to ask Billy too. Is there a way that students might get a some sort of an indication that they are not, they're overdue, or they'll get a flag as to a deadline date, that kind of a thing?
Sure. I mean, the one thing that I could think of, and particularly in that case where it's just a pass fail, it's just simply something that needs to be done.
But if that has a date deadline.
Right. I mean, so one thing I could recommend, particularly if there's any documentation that student needs to provide to confirm that they've completed, one thing that I would recommend in those cases would be to set up an assignment, same as everything else, but instead of setting a point value, as might be the norm for a graded assignment, you could just set it to, instead of a point value, you could grade it on a scale, and you could just simply choose the pass-fail scale. Right. So it's just the same as any other assignment, just with a pass-fail grade. In the gradebook, however, so what you could do is you could set it up to have a 0 weight. So you could manipulate the weights in the gradebook so that it counts for 0% of the course grade, and nor does it need to, because at the end of the day, all that matters is, did they do it? Did they not? So all the other components in the gradebook could be a certain percentage, a certain point value, tallying up to some numeric end goal. But you could have other items as well, pass, fail, and unweighted. And those could simply serve as a checklist. Did they do it? Did they not? And of course, being that it's an assignment, you could set up a due date that they must get it in by, which would flag the students in their eClass calendars. They would see it, and if it's built into a particular time-sensitive module of the course, they would see it. Like, so if it's like due in week 4, you could put it in week 4 and set a due date. But in terms of the grading and the setup, you could set it up pass, fail, and unweighted.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a common question, I feel like, because there's particularly in the professional academic schools and divisions. So in your case, for the clinical documentation, I know a fair amount of the education courses require a certain level of professional development in courses. So students in those cases would need to submit proof that they attended some sort of professional development, whether it's a certificate or if they were running it, maybe some documentation that they actually, maybe the pamphlet to show that, oh yes, I was actually on the byline for this conference presentation. Yeah, so I feel like a lot of instructors would benefit from that question.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Bernadette, how about your case?
So I teach two different programs, the undergrad and the graduate. So in the graduate, it's a hybrid classroom, though traditionally, in person, we transfer to virtual. But the grading system itself, just referring for now, at least at the undergraduate level, based on experiences in different ways to grade, I also use, like what you had done, different assessment types for grading purposes, objectively, and an assignment that would be graded in terms of participation and a reflection of what they had done in relation to their approach to test taking strategies. So for the undergrad, I do use, in the graduate program too, I use the point system, and my explanation again is that you will see your progression as to how many points you have earned up to this point. That's why I have to make sure that the gradebook is set up properly so that they will see how they're doing. And I do use those due dates within the gradebook system. And one of the things that I kind of like as E-class is evolving is the embedding the rubrics within each activity. So for instance, in the graduate, for the discussion forums, so I have built this grading rubric. And for me personally, which I explain to students, my criteria and the level of expectations, I do start off with the highest. So I do have like 3 columns in my rubric. And I start, let's say, from exceptional, accomplishing, and developing. And my explanation to students is that you immediately focus on what's expected at the highest level. So they can see that right away. So it's easier, I think, for me as a grader, because I focus on that, and that's my expectation, and that is their expectation for themselves. So I've always done that type of setup in a descending order, starting from the highest down to the lowest, with just 3 different layers based on the Benner's, competencies level, from expertise down to novice. So I just kind of pick the highest, the middle, and then the developing, not or minimum, because there was one grading rubric that was the wording of it.
That's a really good practice for rubric. I mean, rubrics themselves, I find that for students, it's like we indicated, adds clear clarity and transparency for what's expected for the students, and also an accountability factor, I find too, because then they know exactly what bar they need to meet. But particularly, like starting with the very highest level of proficiency they can demonstrate, it definitely sets the bar, optically, they're seeing the bar that they should be aspiring to, which I think is particularly valuable.
And the fact that when they do submit an assignment, there was one, I think it was a research paper for my graduate program, just even before they submit, they would see that rubric, because it's looking at them. Okay, am I ready now to click submit, because the rubric is in front of them, just for a double checking purposes.
Exactly.
So it kind of really helps, and then whatever I put as feedback, then it transfers to the gradebook. So that's
actually in conjunction with the whole concept of grading too, I find it as just as a faculty member, having a rubric and using that as the basis for the grading takes a lot of pressure. I know it makes it a lot more simple a task to grade, because you have the parameters set and you just have to go by what you've written down. I don't know, I always tell people so having a rubric is a very student-centered idea, because students know the criteria very clearly defined, and that's what they have to aspire to when they're submitting their assignment. So they know they know what's going on as much as possible. But I think in terms of student-centered versus person-centered teaching, student-centered is students know exactly what is going on, and you can grade them fairly. And I think on the other person's side, person-centered teaching, it's like, okay, the student is a solid person, I like them, so I'm grading holistically, and I'm just going to cut them a little slack, which of course, if the students are good people, we may want to do, but it's not necessarily in their favor. So student-centered approaches,
I think just to add to that, when I do use my rubric specifically for, say, case presentations or any kind of collaborative activity, I have the rubric, but I also have a specific feedback, constructive feedback area that's narrative. But what I was just thinking that's really essential, and in the best interest of the student and the faculty, is that you have three markers or three measures to effectively convey to the student your expectations and their performance, and that is your syllabus, your rubric that's embedded in the syllabus or in the course, and then the gradebook. So the student has multiple, what's the word, mirrors or clarifications of what's expected for the course. And I think the more measurable and the more defined, the smoother the smoother the course will run for both faculty and student.
Right, I agree.
And that's
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, it's particularly in terms of when it's a kind of a hybridized or online format, because in that case, your course is the syllabi, the rubrics, the online documents that you put in, because that particularly if it's running asynchronously, the more definition, the more context, the more organization you can build into your course, like you said, the smoother it will run.
And our students are the younger students, undergraduate, they're coming from high schools that use rubric methodology.
Yes.
This is the norm nowadays. This is expected. So the students are going to be looking for that rubric, whereas maybe much older students didn't have this, but they would appreciate it. So certainly, I think it's the norm and it's expected. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Clarity really from the start is crucial. And yes, and consistency, and rubric could be there, and that's why our measurements within the rubric has to be as best written, so that and that's, at least for me personally, that's how I have evolved in those rubric formation, if I can say it that way, because there's some missing elements and things that could be clarified or removed because it's not as necessary.
Right.
And I thought another area, in terms of rubric, I know it's about gradebook, but has something to do a lot with the way rubrics are set up. It is when I have done a culminating project or any project that has group activity, I give the students the onus to provide their own feedback. And I have that criteria specifically under teamwork collaboration, where the peers will grade their peers. And then I average that and add that to the rest of my criteria, because the workings before the presentation or the final product, I'm not there.
Right.
So I give them that responsibility to, and explain to them the importance of really grading their peers. And I think from that feedback, they learn from them as well, in addition to my overall feedback for the group. It's a little bit tough because I guess that's something in terms of setting up, because it's almost like a manual grading then, because if they have really a lot of differences in their peers grading, you have to account for that with the rest of the group's grade. That's the only, I guess, disadvantage from a teacher's point of view there, side on how to do it in that process. But I believe in peer evaluation as well, not just from.
Absolutely. And particularly in thinking of the different contexts for learning. I mean, interpersonal relations, it's the social context for learning. particularly valuable. I try to build those kinds of structures in my courses too, because I mean, some will fly on their own, some will benefit just from having the social context, just to have a peer to bounce ideas off of, or just maybe it's just the conversational piece that will benefit their learning.
Mhm.
But yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you, so in those peer evaluations, so are they working in groups previously, or is it an individual project that the peers are giving feedback on?
It will be a project that they all have to work on before
Right.
a presentation,
That's my case too.
before
I mean,
submission. Yes.
yeah, in my case, it was a weekly group project. So I let them meet on their own. And again, and it's my asynchronous online course I was doing this for. So they had to meet via Zoom or whatever context they wanted to meet on, as long as there was evidence of their meeting. And but what I did is yeah, particularly because group projects, maybe we have bitter flashbacks, or we are a little fearful because we know how group projects stereotypically will run. But yes, peer evaluations, and I do peer rubric as well for mine. In which case, and I have some set criteria that I want them to meet and evaluate each other on. Did this peer demonstrate leadership quality? Were they helping to set goals for the group? Did they help meet the goals for the group? Things like that. And each group member would evaluate both themselves and all of the colleagues that were in that group. And same, I would take the actual grade I assigned for the project, like the actual work, and then I would average it with their peer rubric evaluation. Yeah, and that's it has helped the quality of the group work in the courses that I teach. So I find it definitely valuable. So thanks for bringing that up.
I may just want to add one more thing that I'm trying this time around.
Sure.
This is for the undergraduate, and see how that goes. And so one of the student kind of assignment culminating project is that I am giving them a choice whether they will do a individual project, which was an interview slash research paper, versus a group project. Because I know some students are so into, let me just do the group, maybe it's easy, but because they have the same value and making sure that the amount of work in creating that individual slash group project is pretty much the same. So I still have yet to see how that would pan out. So, but I did a survey this last week during our first day. And I did tell them, I just want to have an overview of where you're at, which project do you like to achieve this particular point. And then come next week, I have that particular list. So in case they change their mind, they have that opportunity to make a change that next week, so they can proceed with that project. But I really think in education, though, I wanted students to have a choice, because each of them are different in the way they learn. So I gave them different topics, and all these topics we will be discussing anyway. So that's why I did it as a due date by the end of the course of the 15 weeks. So we'll see.
That's a great opportunity for differentiation. So my strategy was just to have everyone do differentiated assignments, whereas you gave them the choice. And I think
I gave them
awesome.
a choice. So far, we'll see next week how that goes.
I mean, it's one of the simplest engagement strategies that you could make, and it's one of the most effective. Give them a little bit of agency in the course, and then they'll make it their own. That's awesome.
Right, thanks.
But yeah, so unless we have any closing thoughts or what have you, I think that's our time. So any faculty members out there in the world, if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out. If you have any questions with regards to setting up your gradebook and implementing a grading method that will best benefit you and your students, feel free to reach me and my office at onlinelearning@msmc.edu. We also have resources available on our website, onlinelearning.msmc.edu, and our YouTube channel, MSMC Online Learning. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.